Since the days of the early church, Christians have incorporated pilgrimages as part of their spiritual journey and enhancing their relationship with Christ, and I want to give you the gift of a pilgrimage in April of 2027. Come join me and Father Kenneth Parsad as we lead a pilgrimage to France and trace the path of some of the greatest French saints. This 11-day pilgrimage includes visits to Lisieux, Normandy, Paris, Mont Saint-Michel, Rouen, and Lourdes. We will visit the homes, convents, and tombs of the most influential French saints: St. Therese the Little Flower, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Dominic, St. Vincent de Paul, St. Joan of Arc, and more. And we will celebrate daily private Mass in some of the most iconic churches like the Abbey of Mont Saint-Michel, Sacré-Cœur in Paris, and the Chapel of the Miraculous Medal in Lourdes. This is a trip that will change your life. Learn more at ycatholic.substack.com/pilgrimage. I hope to see you there. I am probably the least partisan person you may ever meet. At least I like to think that I am. One thing that drives me nuts about politics is that people have very strong opinions about particular issues that they know nothing about. I was tired of constantly seeing people get outraged on social media and then state things that were completely not true, so I decided to do something about it. I started a podcast called Politics in Plain English. The whole goal of the podcast was to inform people about the truth by digging deep into these topics. There was no political angle, no sensationalism, no spin, just a lot of facts. Why are gas prices higher, and does the president have an effect on gas prices? What's the deal with the Keystone XL pipeline? Was the 2020 election really stolen? Every week, I spend an inordinate amount of time consuming primary sources and really digging deep into issues. I followed rabbit holes, looked at charts, consumed data, and then synthesized the information in a way that was easy to consume in about 15 minutes. The show was new, but it was something I had been doing for a long time. You see, for years, I had done a lot of political writing where I would write about some hot topic and share some key takeaways. During COVID, I would see some sensationalist headline on a news website, and I would immediately try and find the medical study they were quoting from. I was a good journalist who was uninterested in ever working for a journalism company. I liked my method. It was honest. There were no deadlines. I didn't have a boss. I wasn't forced to make sensational headlines for clickbait, and I didn't work for some company that had a political bias. It was just me, sifting through a slew of primary sources, gleaning from a select group of secondary sources, and synthesizing the information. It wasn't sexy, but the truth often is not. One thing I realized by diving into primary sources is that journalism has by and large become an industry that is more focused on getting clicks than telling the truth. Let me pause for just a second and clarify what I mean when I say primary sources. A primary source is an original first-hand account or physical evidence of an event. So, for example, a primary source might be a medical study, whereas a secondary source is a source that interprets, analyzes, or summarizes primary sources. That might be an article on a news network like CNN about a medical study. But what I found is oftentimes the news articles that I was coming across completely misinterpreted the primary source. It's like they didn't read it, or they assumed what it said, or they just regurgitated someone else's opinion. Shortly after I became Catholic, I stopped writing about politics and current events. I was burned out. I spent so much time researching and writing about topics that mattered for a hot second. Everyone was outraged about a particular issue, and then a week later, it didn't matter anymore. But what I realized in all of this is that I had developed a skill for researching and synthesizing information into digestible pieces that ended up becoming the basis of a new endeavor, sharing my Catholic faith through a podcast called Why Catholic. And this skill that I've been honing for years and years becomes particularly useful when it comes to a hot topic that lots of people have opinions about, but few have really actually studied, like the Second Vatican Council. Hi, this is Justin Hibbard, and you're listening to Why Catholic, my podcast about the what and why of the Catholic faith. Thank you so much for joining me today as we begin a new series on Vatican II. But before we do, I want to share my gratitude. First, I want to say thank you for joining me today, especially if you are a regular listener of Why Catholic. Secondly, I want to thank those of you who have been a source of encouragement, whether that's leaving positive ratings and feedback on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leaving positive comments on my social media channels, or sending me direct messages. I don't always see all of the comments on my posts, but I do see a lot of them, and they are by and large a godsend. And I do try and read and respond to every direct message I see, so thank you. Last but certainly not least, let me thank those of you who are financial supporters of this podcast. I could not do this without your help. I've said this before and I'll reiterate it. There are millions of podcasts out there, and every one of them wants you to be a financial supporter. If you listen to podcasts like I do, you could easily go broke supporting all the podcasts that you listen to. So here's my suggestion. If there's 2 or 3 podcasts that are your go-to podcasts and have become an important part of your life, please consider supporting them. Trust me, it goes a long way. And if Why Catholic is one of those podcasts, I would love for you to become a patron. It's easy to do. Just go to whycatholic.substack.com/subscribe. As I mentioned, this is a new series on the topic, really the documents of the Second Vatican Council, aka Vatican II. This was the Church's 21st and most recent General or Ecumenical Council. At the time of this recording, the SSPX, or Society of St. Pius X, has recently been excommunicated. They were already a congregation that had an irregular relationship with the Catholic Church, but when they decided to ordain 4 bishops despite the Vatican's warnings, they were met with a swift excommunication. What made the SSPX so controversial to begin with was their claims that Vatican II was a stark departure on faithful Catholic teaching. And suddenly, the viral news of the SSPX being excommunicated has resurfaced debates and curiosities about Vatican II. Now, I'm a relatively recent convert who was born some 16 years after Vatican II, so I have no recollection of what the Catholic Church was before, during, or right after Vatican II. But growing up, even in my Protestant algorithm, I still formed an opinion of Vatican II based on little whisperings I'd hear from Catholic relatives or something I'd read in a Dan Brown novel. And my takeaway was that Vatican II was controversial. Everyone seemed to have an opinion as to whether it was a positive or a negative for the Catholic Church. And because I'm a curious wannabe journalist, I thought, you know what I want to do? I want to actually read all of the primary source documents of Vatican II for myself. And when I posed the idea on my social media channels about doing this as a podcast series, a lot of people chimed in and said, please do this, and we'll read along with you. Now, I recognize that I'm not the first to do this. There are a couple of shows out there that have tackled something similar to this. So why am I doing it? Well, first, I've given a look at some of these resources out there, and I think they could be done in a better format. And secondly, it's okay to have another version of something that's already been done. And thirdly, I wanted to read the documents anyway, and enough people wanted to join me. Seems like we could kill multiple birds with one stone. And lastly, I'm approaching this as a Catholic convert who is a layman with a passion for primary source journalism, theology, and ecclesiology. So maybe my take may be a little different than, say, a cradle Catholic priest. We're beginning today with a little introduction of Vatican II first because some context is helpful. I want to start by giving you a brief history of Vatican II, then we'll talk about the documents, and then we'll talk about the format for this series. Let's begin with a brief history of Vatican II. I did a whole episode on Vatican II as part of my series on the 21 Ecumenical Councils, so if you want to dive a little deeper into the context of Vatican II, listen to episode 174. The First Vatican Council ended in 1870, rather abruptly, and so for a number of years there had been discussions on reconvening Vatican I and finishing what it aimed to start. Then there were 2 world wars, the introduction of modern technology like radio, television, and transportation. When John XXIII was elected Pope in 1958, he decided he was going to convene an ecumenical council. About 2,900 were invited to be council fathers. These included all the bishops as well as leaders of main religious orders of men. However, in the end, about 2,400 of them attended from all parts of the world, making this, by far, the largest attended church council. Keep in mind that this was the first council where they had airplanes and even electricity. Attending previous councils meant perilous journeys over boats, carriages, or even walking, and it could have taken weeks, maybe even months. Pope John XXIII also thought it important to invite members of other Christian faith communities. Representatives of 21 different denominations attended and were invited to observe the general councils, though of course they weren't allowed to vote on anything. A number of lay auditors were also asked to attend, and while they couldn't vote, they were asked to speak to the General Assembly and convey the concerns of lay people. The Second Vatican Council was convened in St. Peter's Basilica on October 11, 1962, in which Pope John XXIII gave an opening address entitled Gaudet Mater Ecclesia, Mother Church Rejoices. In it, he laid out 2 primary goals for the 21st Council. First, he called for the defense and advancement of truth. How can the church seek the kingdom of God, contribute to justice, and address the moral concerns of the modern scientific world? Secondly, he wanted the council to bring home the church's teaching to the modern world. He sought a new springtime, a renewal of the church, an exciting rejuvenation to transmit the truth faithfully, to tactfully address errors, to promote Christian unity, and to prioritize the role of family. This was to be a pastoral council rather than a council that was formed to address heresies or some sort of political conflict. The council met from 1962 through 1965. Pope John XXIII died less than a year into the council, and he was succeeded by Pope Paul VI, who continued the council. At the end of the day, the Second Vatican Council published 16 documents, and they're not all equal in weight. 4 of them are constitutions. These are the most important. 9 of them are decrees, which are secondary, and 3 of them are declarations. Now, there's lots of debate about what it means for us everyday Catholics. Are we required to hold the documents as infallible like we do with the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed from the first 2 ecumenical councils, or the Declaration of Mary as the Mother of God from the Third Ecumenical Council? And my answer to that is not necessarily. I think we have to give deference to this council and understand that not only was it a legitimate council, but it was one of the 21 most authoritative councils, and it had by far the largest representation of the church in attendance. To dismiss the council is heterodoxy. I think we also have to see the documents in a type of hierarchy. The 4 constitutions are the most important. In fact, they are called the dogmatic constitutions. Regarding the 9 decrees and 4 declarations, I would invite you to see them as the direction of the church, and until the church decides to change direction, this is where the church is headed. Really, we have to see Vatican II in the continuum of church teaching. I've included a great article about this in the show notes called A Pastoral and Dogmatic Council. And I would also encourage you to remember this, something I talked about in my series on the ecumenical councils. The times are always changing, and much of the church's ecumenical councils address this underlying question: how does the church operate within its contemporary world? Vatican II was no different. So instead of jumping to the conclusion that Vatican II made a sharp departure from Orthodox Catholic teaching, wrestle with the question, is this really a doctrinal change, or is it more along the lines of applying its ancient doctrines in a modern framework? So let's conclude by talking about how this series is going to go. In every episode, I'm going to read a chunk of the document. My intention is to stay as close as possible to 17 minutes. Remember, that's the length of a TED Talk, so I really try to adhere to that rule. I'm going to spend the majority of time reading the document, and then I'm going to conclude by summarizing, synthesizing, and commenting on what I just read. I'm not going to stop in the middle of the reading to comment about it because I really want to focus on the primary source nature of this, and I want to make it really easy for you to distinguish between the actual document and my editorial comments. Now, I haven't decided whether I'm going to do this as one long continuous series, which I estimate may take about 90 episodes, or if I will do 1 or 2 particular documents, do a different series, and then come back and do another 1 or 2 documents. Time will tell. But what I will do is order them not by the time that they were written, but by their importance. So we'll begin with the 4 constitutions, starting with Lumen Gentium, the dogmatic constitution of the Catholic Church. Then we'll tackle the 9 decrees and conclude with the 3 declarations. And let me warn you, this isn't light reading. These documents contain a lot of nuance and language, and so I would encourage you, if at all possible, to read along with me. In each episode, I'm going to link to the primary source document where you can read it for yourself. And I'll begin each episode by telling you which sections we'll be reading so you can follow right along. Let me conclude with this thought. As I said in conclusion of my series on the ecumenical councils, the most challenging aspect of the council is always implementation. The council fathers meet, they make decisions, they write decrees, but then they have to disseminate what they decided to the clergy and ultimately the faithful at the local parishes. That's incredibly challenging. And my theory is that it takes about 100 years for a council's decisions to really take root. At the time of this recording, we are about 60 years removed from Vatican II. After Vatican II, there were a lot of clergy who implemented things in the quote-unquote spirit of Vatican II, and I'm not really sure that it was actually anything remotely close to the spirit of Vatican II. And so as you read these documents, one of the things to really discern is, has what the council set forth been faithfully implemented or implemented at all? And how can we as individuals do our part to help implement the plan envisioned by the Council Fathers? Thank you for joining me for Why Catholic. Be sure to subscribe to Why Catholic wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also subscribe to my Substack site and get the next episode in your email inbox. As a subscriber, you get a special discount code to the Why Catholic Etsy store. If you've been blessed by this podcast and you're feeling generous, there's also a way to financially support it, and patrons get some extra perks. To become a free subscriber or a patron, just go to whycatholic.substack.com/subscribe. Also join me on Instagram at Why Catholic Podcast, all one word. Thanks again for listening. My name is Justin Hibbard, and this is Why Catholic. God bless you.